For a long time, Alberta's labor market was strong. If you lost a job, it wouldn't be long before you were hired elsewhere. However, over the past several decades, Alberta's labor market has seen some turmoil, and Albertans have navigated employment and unemployment through oil price crashes, global pandemics, and more. Just a few short months ago, Alberta's long-term unemployment rate was one of the highest in Canada, the second highest, in fact. And recent job news shows that the long-term unemployment rate in Alberta is improving, but we still have a problem that needs fixing. Hey there, you're listening to The Brief, an Alberta Better podcast series. I'm Brittany Brander, and in this series, my co-host, Scott Crockett, and I explore Alberta's big challenges, celebrate stories of growth, innovation, and prosperity, and discover bold ideas to make life better for Albertans. On this episode, we're talking to Becky Penrice, the Executive Vice President at ATCO, and take a closer look at unemployment in the province, the broader workforce developments and trends impacting talent attraction, and how we can continue to ensure that Albertans have access to the jobs and the skills they need to succeed, and so much more. If you liked this episode and want to support our message of shared prosperity for all, please be sure to head over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts to subscribe, rate the show, and give us a quick review. Enjoy the show. Becky, thank you so much for joining us on The Brief this morning. It's really early, Stampede Week, and we're talking about long-term unemployment. But before we get into this conversation, can you just share a little bit more about, who you are, what you do, and what I find most interesting is why you do it?
Sure, and thanks for having me, Brittany. I joined ATCO almost 3 years ago after a long retail career with two iconic Canadian companies. I've worked in all facets of the business, spanning supply chain, IT, marketing, communications, and I spent a good chunk of my career in human resources. I've had the opportunity to work across Canada and in the US, and I've definitely lived through and worked through some very difficult times. I currently lead the corporate services team at ATCO, which spans much of the areas I just talked about. At the core of my work, though, I am an enabler of the business, providing meaningful strategic direction and expertise in the areas of HR, communications, marketing, governance, supply chain, and so on. And it is a good question on why I do it. I do this work not because I sought it out. This is not the path I expected to be on, Brittany, but it found me. I love the opportunity to have a breadth of understanding across all of the business units. And I get the opportunity to influence so many areas and most importantly, help our businesses grow through providing what I think are the coolest, most important functions in the organization, which is all of those administrative and support departments across the enterprise.
Yeah, I know marketing, HR can often go unrecognized and unappreciated. So I'm happy that this career path found you, and you love it. We love some passion in our jobs. Can you give us just a little bit more on ATCO? It's kind of a household name, but people might not know the full breadth of the company. Can you just give us a little bit of an elevator pitch on what ATCO is and kind of what services you provide?
Sure. Yeah, it's a difficult one. When I first joined ATCO, I thought, man, how do I describe this company? So I'm going to try to do like the 3-floor elevator pitch, maybe. So ATCO is basically a homegrown entrepreneurial Alberta success story that started with a trailer, a father and son, and a dream. 75 years later, ATCO is a diversified $22 billion enterprise with over 6,000 employees spanning the globe. We operate in Canada, Australia, Mexico, Chile, Puerto Rico, and the US, and we've worked in over 100 countries around the world. And if I was to try to distill, what is ATCO? ATCO basically offers its customers premier, comprehensive, and integrated solutions that are fundamental to global growth and prosperity in the areas of housing, real estate, energy, water, and transition. So really the essentials of life. From delivering efficient and reliable energy for homes, businesses, and communities to affordable temporary and permanent buildings, we build communities. We energize industries, and we deliver inspired solutions for a better world. And I can say that as we celebrate our 75th anniversary, we have never been more ready to provide our customers with newer, better, more sustainable solutions for a better world.
Well, happy 75th anniversary as well.
Thank
to
you.
As you were telling that story about how, it sort of all began with the father, a son, and a trailer, I saw a piece that you produced, I think, a little bit earlier this year, effectively, kind of an annual report on a tiny little card that showed the financials from year one and the financials from the most recent year. Year one being, I think there was a net loss.
That's right.
A tiny bit of trailer revenue, and then obviously the most recent year, a global company, doing billions and billions in business. And I thought, wow, what a success story that is.
Absolutely. And it's one of the reasons I joined the company. Who doesn't want to work for a place that wants to make the world a better place, right?
For sure. So our conversation today is maybe slightly less inspiring than that. We're talking about Alberta's really unfortunate tenure of long-term unemployment. This is a big and challenging issue that so many Alberta families have struggled with over the past several years. So much so that BCA struck a task force in 2021 to study what was driving Alberta's long-term unemployment rate, and then look at what are the potential solutions to get Albertans back into the workforce and prepared for the jobs of the future. And you chaired that task force. So we're going to get into the report, into the nitty-gritty of what we're recommending. But can you share with us just a little bit about why you got into that, why you decided to chair that task force?
As a leader in the business of hiring and retaining and attracting talent, I have a vested interest in understanding and potentially shaping policy and directions we may take to address the issues of long-term unemployment and the associated consequences of inaction. As part of the community, it's also important to not just talk about the problem from the sidelines, but come together and try to find meaningful solutions. And of course, understanding that these issues are complex and there's no easy solution, the opportunity for me to participate in this task force was incredibly appealing, because I know I don't have all the answers. I know that one person, one company, one perspective can't possibly understand fully the problem, and certainly can't, figure out how we're going to tackle some of these issues, which, as you point out, are longstanding. So being a part of the task force for me gave me the opportunity to, collaborate with, super accomplished leaders across industries, learn and expand my understanding through their experiences and perspectives, which I think really led to a very fulsome and comprehensive report, because it wasn't sort of a one perspective view.
Well, let's get into it. So for a long time, Alberta's job market was very strong. And if you found yourself without a job, you could find one relatively quickly. However, the past decade has just been really rough on Alberta's workforces. We've got oil price crashes, just a struggling economy, COVID. And, as a result, Alberta has dealt with one of the highest rates of long-term unemployment in Canada for some time. Can you unpack what's driving that phenomenon? And then, maybe take a step back and just talk to us a little bit about what it means to be unemployed. Paint us a picture of what that looks like.
Sure. And thanks for the really easy question, Brittany. So the labor market definitely has changed significantly after the 2014 oil price crash, for sure. Since then, the share of Albertans unable to find work for more than a year has soared, and it's risen above the national averages, and it's remained there for at least the last 5 years. So this is a very different picture than it was a decade ago in Alberta. And while strides have been made, I will give some credit, there still remains a lack of industry diversification in Alberta to weather this boom or bust kind of economy that exists, as the nature of oil and gas industry, and more than that, the introduction of automation and new technology is starting to transform the modern workplace. And the types of jobs and skills needed to do these jobs are changing. And then you add on to that the low carbon energy transition that's happening, not just in Alberta, but around the world, and the erosion of high paying oil and gas jobs. And you're left with a pretty tough labor environment. All is not lost, though. I do think there are exciting opportunities being created in renewable energy, clean tech, and a number of other emerging markets. And while these jobs are expected to be many, having the skills to meet that new environment is going to be a key factor to bridge the gap between long-term unemployment and the jobs that are available. And as it relates to, what it is to be long-term unemployed, there's the definition, and then there's what it's really like. Long-term unemployment means that you're missing out on valuable work experience. So you're going to start lagging the market in terms of your skills. Job training, you're not getting the job training that's going to keep up with the pace of advancements in the workplace. Your skills are eroding, you're less confident, and you're, I'm using air quotes, less attractive as a candidate out there. Long-term unemployment, means you are twice as likely to experience poverty than someone who is unemployed for less than 6 months. It means your standard of living is diminished. It means your pride, your mental health suffer, and many people lose hope.
Becky, what a stark picture you've painted there. But I think it's really important that we talk about long-term unemployment as sort of distinct from other kinds of unemployment for the reasons you've just described. It can be kind of a dark place, and while all of us will probably experience periods of unemployment over the course of our career, and everyone can expect to, if they're relatively short-lived and under 6 months, it can have a pretty limited impact on your overall life, and people sort of pick themselves up and move on to the next thing. But for all those reasons you've just described, someone who's unemployed over the long term, it can affect them career-wise and mentally as well.
Yeah, definitely. It's that 1 year and above that really starts to, I think, affect all of those things that I talked about, mental health, skills, and otherwise. And in Alberta, we have a significant population that is long-term unemployed, and certainly above what we're seeing in other provinces, which makes this such an important topic.
Fantastic. So let's talk a little bit more about that. I liked that you framed this as a long-term issue, because one of the things that we're all experiencing in Alberta right now is, in this exact moment, the Alberta economy is booming. And so things are improving, and we have seen some good improvement in some of the long-term unemployment numbers. From a high of about 60,000 long-term unemployed Albertans, our economists tell us in the most recent labor market numbers that there's now about 22,000 long-term unemployed Albertans. So that's significant improvement for tens of thousands of people, but that's still a labor force about the size of my hometown of Lloydminster's, of folks who are long-term unemployed. And that's what I think this task force was looking to take on over the long term. So maybe I'll just open it up wide. This report that you produced and chaired the task force on to address that long-term issue of long-term unemployment. What were some of the key findings and recommendations that you thought were exciting?
And I'd love to be able to take credit for some of the improvement, but I think it speaks to the problem, right? And why it never gets solved. Because we are in a bit of a boom right now, it's easy to kind of go, oh, okay, it's kind of fixed itself. And I think that, there needs to be more systemic solutions that we work on. So the way that we kind of approach the recommendations is, we looked at building a strong foundation, and this goes back to the, it's not a one and done. There needs to be a suite of solutions. Some of them are more immediate and address real issues today, and some of them are about preparing for a more resilient future. So building a strong foundation is one of the things that we talked about, and that's really making sure that we have a strong national competency framework that's pan-Canadian. It involves government, post-secondary institutions, business, and the labor force, because we need to start to understand, what are we going to need in the workforce? What are those skills and competencies, so that we're not having this issue of a skills mismatch, which we know we're having today when we have, I'm probably going to quote the wrong numbers, but I think it was like 180,000, job seekers or jobs available, and 60,000 people looking for jobs. And we weren't able to find a match for those, which spoke to a bit of a skills mismatch. And so the idea is, we need to kind of start from the beginning and get that competency framework built out. And then in addition to that, we need to really identify what are those skills shortages and market gaps. And that comes, certainly from business, but it also is, how are we working with post-secondary education to start to meet those needs? How are they building those skills now for the future of what business is going to be looking for? So really, that was sort of the foundational piece that we were looking at. And this is not an easy ask. This requires government to get involved, to strike up a task force. And it's not going to be something that gives an immediate solution today, but it will start to lay the foundation for a better understanding of how we build the workforce of the future, but also how we build training programs for those who lack the skills to get back into that workforce.
So Becky, for a total layperson, would you describe how would you describe a national competency framework? Is this, is this a shared understanding across the country and between businesses and governments of, of just what skills are necessary and what skills are likely to be necessary in the future? Tell me, do you agree or disagree with that framing, or is there more to it than that?
Yes, I agree with that framing. That's exactly what it is. It sounds fancy, HR people like me, we love to make it sound like it's super complicated, but it's a grid system basically where you match, skills and abilities and competencies and the types of things. It's not just, one skill matched to one person. There's also skill adjacencies, which is taking skills that people have in industries maybe that are no longer there, or in technology that no longer exists, and then looking at it and saying, okay, that competency, that ability could translate into marketing because it's all data science and AI, and nobody would think that maybe there's a connection, but it's trying to make those linkages so that you can teach people who have some of those adjacent skills and competencies the new ones, and recognizing in them that they have the ability to do that. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's not a really complex framework, but it takes time and it takes collaboration amongst a number of different stakeholders.
Yeah, both kind of simple and complex at the same time. I see that. One of the other recommendations that I want to ask you about is the concept of a one-stop window for training, both for businesses and for people, because this is something that I've sort of seen and observed problems with, both on the people side, the feeling like sometimes there's probably some training support available for me out there somewhere, but I don't know exactly where it is, or maybe particularly for maybe even small and medium businesses, kind of thinking there's probably some support I could get for training my employees, but I don't know where it is. So tell me about that recommendation, how it came about.
Yeah, the task force had a lot of conversation about this because for job seekers, for businesses, for all of the various stakeholders that are trying to kind of unpack this whole thing, it's really complex. Just try Googling it. You're going to get a million different places
Job
to go.
training. Yeah.
You got it. And so the idea is, if we really want to if we want to provide meaningful support, training programs, social support, whatever that is, let's make it easy for people. Right now, it feels like it's you have to kind of demystify it. You got to get out of all of the sort of different ways that you have to arrive at it. We really talked about that one-stop solution. So one-stop window where, it's administered maybe by a not-for-profit organization. It helps individuals, businesses, community organizations. And it's also informed by the right people. So it's built by people who will use it, and it's tested. And we also went as far as to talk about the kinds of people that are on the other end of the phone or the other end of the chat that are dealing with these people who are just looking for help, right? So we talked about having more customer service oriented people, that it doesn't feel like it's about, pushing paper. It's about genuinely helping people. And if you think about so many companies that have a service model sort of culture, right? You think about Zappos, or, their job is to make people happy. We were really talking about, and it sounds silly, but think about the dire picture that I painted at the beginning of those individuals who are struggling and they're looking for help. So we really want to make it easy, and we want it to be a place of real help.
So I want to pick up on another one of the themes or another one of the recommendations in the report, and it's reforming this Canada Alberta job grant. Can you speak to what that is and what we're recommending?
Sure. So the Canada Alberta job grant is an incentive program that is about contributing to the workforce development in Alberta. And, our recommendation is that there needs to be greater incentive from the federal government to improve access to employer-driven training for unemployed Albertans. And so really limiting that funding to go towards unemployed workers versus all workers. We think that would really help to address this population of long-term unemployed in Alberta.
Yeah, really targeting the solutions.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
That makes sense. Another area of recommendation discussion that I wanted to ask you about, and I had the opportunity to sit in on a little bit of the task force dialogue around this, is EI reform. And I know that was something that the task force spent some time sort of really talking through and digging into a little bit. Becky, would you share with us your thoughts on EI reform, what could be done there?
Yeah, we definitely spent a lot of time talking about this because there's a little bit of a double-edged sword when we're talking about social programs, because we want them to be meaningful and to provide real help. But there, quite honestly, the discussion that we had was also, if we make it too generous, too large, then it creates an environment where, against the job market and what's available, it becomes a more meaningful alternative. And the idea of employment insurance isn't, for it to be a backstop for forever. It's meant to be, a way to bridge people from employment to their next or unemployment to their next employment. So there was a lot of debate on this. And so what we talked about was recommending that the government of Canada reform EI programs to shift its focus towards supporting individuals to upgrade their skills. So creating incentives, whether that is, a bit of a top up for unemployment or employment insurance for people who take training programs, self-directed training programs, skills development. Because, my view, and certainly the view of many on the task force, was employment insurance, again, it's meant to help while, bridging to the next opportunity. But if the next opportunity isn't coming because I don't have the skills and I don't have the training, it's really not having an impact, and it's wasted dollars. It's dollars that we're going to continue to see people showing up in this program, showing up in this cycle, if we're not able to provide meaningful training and skill development. So our idea really is to invest additional funds towards retraining and skill development, which will increase the likelihood of long-term unemployed workers finding meaningful work.
And I have to admit to you, I absolutely love this idea.
Me too.
It's an area that I'm quite passionate about. I think that EI is a great program. It's done a lot of good things. It's also well funded. But if we could tweak the incentives a little bit at that key tipping point, right, when people are moving from unemployment to employment again, or are about to do that, if there's a little bit of an additional wind at their back that we could give them to go into that training program or to start that next job, why wouldn't we do that and just sort of help them over the edge? So we've also talked through, a number of the recommendations now, and feel free to highlight any others if you'd like to as well. But I guess the flip side of the coin that I'd also ask you is, what might happen if we don't take action on these issues? Why we should feel some urgency behind these recommendations?
Well, if we don't take action, then I think this will become not just a problem for an individual or a family or household, it will become a larger societal problem. A large number of Albertans unable to find work for long periods of time, it's going to lower consumer spending. I mean, we know when people don't have money to spend on goods and services, they're just paying their bills, they're barely getting by. Other businesses are affected by people not putting, money into their tills. So that makes a big difference. Lower tax revenues obviously have an impact on our ability to fund social programs. And over time, it has an impact on the province, lower rates of growth, weaker fiscal position, and so on. But more importantly, continued persistent unemployment leads to increased mental health issues, poverty, crime. Persistent unemployment is associated, studies, not my studies, but these are well-known facts that it's associated with suicide, homelessness, domestic violence, substance abuse, alienation, death from heart disease, and many, many other debilitating factors. So what might happen if this is not addressed? Honestly, I don't think it bears thinking. We have to act, and we must address these issues, or I think the fabric of our communities will continue to erode.
To move in a little bit from the macro discussion that we've been having, I'd love to shift to one of our other themes that we wanted to speak to you about, which is labor challenges, which, having talked about long-term unemployment, this is a little bit different, but it's certainly something I'm hearing almost every day from businesses across the country, and specifically in Alberta. Give us your perspective, Becky, and ATCO's. How tricky is it to find the right employees at the moment? And what do you see as driving the challenges you may be experiencing?
like many other companies, I think, who are looking to innovate and grow, particularly, from our industry, although we are a very diversified business, a good chunk of our business is in energy, and therefore in the world of energy transition, renewables, we're talking about hydrogen and all of these emerging sort of industries. Competition for those same skills right now is tough. I would say, companies emerging from the pandemic are all facing new demands and wants for those, in demand skills in the market, whether it's flexible work environment, more or better environments, better working conditions. All of these things are on top of the challenges of finding the right skills for sure. And so companies are faced with, we have to be more competitive in our pay packages, but more importantly, we have to be more competitive in terms of purpose and culture and why people want to work in our company. Most companies can provide reasonable pay, benefits, things like that, but the most sought after skills and the people who possess them, they want more.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They want to be on big projects. They want to work on meaningful projects and work. And as a result of that, companies need to provide it. And then coming out of the pandemic as well, certainly this idea of flexible work environment is another big topic that we're dealing with when we're meeting with prospective candidates. So being able to meet those new needs coming out of the pandemic, I think, is really important.
And tell me, where's your thinking at right now on flexible work environment, return to office? Where's this discussion out on that, and what's ATCO doing?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. And thank you for not saying, what do you think about return to work? Because that drives me nuts when people say return to work.
I've been trying. Yeah, because there was a time when I probably would have said that. But yeah,
absolutely. You know what? And I did it as well. And I needed to check myself because there was a lot of divide that was created even during the pandemic between sort of people that are primarily work in office people and field people and this idea of returning to work. Well, I don't know about you, but I've never worked harder and never been more tired looking at a screen in my life.
Right.
So yeah, many companies, I think, would never have even thought about a flexible work environment if it hadn't been for the pandemic. So if we're to see any positives coming from this difficult time that we've come out of, companies were able to go fast, right? We adopted technology way faster than we ever would have. It would have been, a million steering committees and, all sorts of PowerPoint decks and then focus groups and everything else. And, they say never waste a good crisis, right? So I think companies were, by necessity, they were able to very quickly adopt technology at a pace probably never seen before. And if leaders used to say we can't operate a flexible work environment before the pandemic, it's really hard for them to stick to that story now.
Yeah.
Workers have seen what is possible, and so have leaders. So now the trick is, how do you create some flexibility without eroding, company culture and that collaboration that, this is my opinion, but collaboration that really fuels innovation if we don't see each other. So as much as it's great to be on, we're on a screen and I can see your faces and we're able to interact, you miss out on those opportunities maybe in the hallway or when you're grabbing a coffee or, to be in a room sort of whiteboarding. So I think it's trying to find that right balance of how do you build in some flexibility, because I don't think there's any company that's going to fully be able to go back and snap the elastic all the way back to, everybody in the office
all the time,
7 days a week, full time. Exactly. And I think we need to address the fact that it feels like there's some divides that were created during the pandemic between office and non-office employees. And, people who want flexibility are not lazy. They're not, less hardworking than their peers. And 100% work from home, hybrid or flexible work environments are not more evolved than ones maybe that aren't fully work from home.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is a really interesting time because, we were all in this in some way, regardless of where you were working. And what I didn't love about it is the judgment that was created around, gosh, you got to do your job in stretchy pants, or which, by the way, I don't know about you, but that did not do anything for me going forward. It actually, from a putting on regular clothes again, I probably should have worn them the whole time. But
Yeah,
I think
some of the
there's
suits don't fit quite how they did before for me, for sure.
well, exactly. It wasn't good to me, the pandemic, but whatever. So I think, it's not going to be just like the solutions to long-term unemployment. It's not going to be a one size fits all. At ATCO, we've been doing some pilots, because it's not just about saying to people, okay, you can work from home 2 days a week and you got to be in the office 3 days a week. You need the right technology. We also, at ATCO, we've been growing. So we're kind of busting at the seams. So using some hot desking is kind of a new thing for us. One of the biggest challenges is having a hybrid meeting. I don't know about you, but when you've got 30% of the people on video and the rest are in a boardroom, even having that connectivity between the entire group is difficult, and how you use technology differently. So even how we run meetings is totally different. So
I think hybrid is harder. That's what I've been saying. It's hybrid is harder than either full in person or full remote, but it's also probably the way things are going to be for a while. So we're going to have to run right through that harder.
Exactly. And I think this is going to really shift and change, how we work. And I don't think it's going to be the same, a year from now as it is today, because we're working through it and we're figuring our way out. But there's no doubt about it. Everyone that I'm talking to in the industry is having the conversation about how do we get more people back in more often.
It's like we're just going through, a societal sociological experience right now, an experiment, and we're just trying to figure out what works. And in that whole process, months ago, we saw headline after headline of workers quitting because they just weren't satisfied with their jobs or whatever, called the Great Resignation. Now that we're probably several months past that, and we're getting into a bit more of a routine, how real do you think the Great Resignation, like how permanent do you think that this idea is in the labor market?
There's so many companies and consultants writing and articles in the paper about the Great Resignation. I often think sometimes these are a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, but my view on this is we definitely see a few pockets of turnover in our business. Certainly nothing that's panicking us yet. I think the reality is the Great Resignation has been happening in the service industry. And it's been happening as a result of the pandemic. It's been happening as a result of these are, and I say this with great respect, lower skilled, lower paying jobs. And so people are able to kind of go in between. They also were shut down and open and shut down during the pandemic. And so people were having to look for different ways and means of employment. So there's certainly been some challenges in the service sector throughout and emerging from the pandemic. I think support and administrative back of house roles have been seeing a bit more turnover because those are kind of industry agnostic. They can go anywhere. And so, the extent to which a company is maybe more fully formed on an issue that's important to them, like hybrid or otherwise, we're certainly seeing that. And there's no doubt that the pandemic has caused many to evaluate or reevaluate their lives, which includes where and how they want to work. But I also think the post-pandemic world has also brought greater job insecurity and worry about the current, inflation, cost of living. And I think that that's creating a different dynamic, which is, people are more concerned about keeping jobs and more concerned about security and having those benefits or having, that pension, because let's face it, we're in a bit of a difficult time right now as we look at the cost of living for people, and it's becoming more and more difficult, and businesses need to support their people and help with those burdens, because anyways, to me, that's the next big challenge we have on top of long-term unemployment, is just the cost for people to be able to live and thrive in their communities.
Cost of living. Yeah. We'll make that the topic of the next podcast. Because we're hearing it every day, and, people are feeling really squeezed under these circumstances. And I really appreciate that sort of note of pragmatism that you put into the concept of the Great Resignation, certainly existing in pockets, but maybe the headlines don't tell the whole story about it.
Exactly.
So as we begin to kind of wrap up here, I guess we've had a wide-ranging conversation today, and we've even, it sounds like, booked another potential podcast to talk about cost of living. Becky, if you could wave a magic wand and advance a policy area, maybe one of the things that we've talked about today, what would you like to push forward first?
Without a doubt, it would be EI reform. I think it's the most comprehensive, well-used and understood program that exists. And I think to get at the most amount of people, I think this is the one that if I could wake up tomorrow and it's in place, this is the one I would really want to see happen. I believe in EI, I believe in the program, but I really think that it needs to modernize and it needs to meet the needs that people have today, which is not just financial needs. It should be helping people to get meaningful employment.
Mm-hmm.
Hear, hear.
Final question for you, Becky. What's one insight or idea that you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I guess what I would say to any of the listeners is this is not an issue for the unemployed. This is about, it's not about someone else. It's actually about you. And if every single person on this call made a commitment to helping displaced Albertans re-enter the workforce, that would be my hope coming out of this. So maybe it's another magic wand moment, but it's not an issue for those unfortunate people. It's actually an issue for each of us. And as business leaders, the extent to which we can reach out into communities, we can reach out and we can start to figure out how we all need people, right? We all need people who are willing and able. If we could just make a commitment to help them develop those skills while on the job. And wouldn't it be great if government would, provide some support to businesses so that we can bring on some, excess costs while we're ramping people up. But yeah, my one and only thought is if you think this isn't your issue, you're wrong.
Well put. Thank you so much, Becky. Appreciate having you on today.
No problem. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you for joining us for this episode of The Brief, an Alberta Better podcast series. This podcast is a production of the Business Council of Alberta. You can learn more about us at businesscouncilab.com. And we'd love to connect with you on social media, so give us a follow at BizCouncilAB on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And if you liked this episode and want to support our message of shared prosperity for all, please be sure to head over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts to subscribe, rate the show, and give us a quick review. New episodes drop every other Tuesday. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.